Hello. Today I'm talking with Alexandra Stokes. We talked about being evangelical, quality processes, and cross contamination.
I'm Ivanul from Who's Agile. My pronouns are he and him. Welcome to my channel. You see a lot of agilists around me on this screen. If you want to hear me interviewing, please click that subscribe button because these are the people that I've invited so far. If you think I'm missing people, let me know in the comments. And that like button, well, if you liked today's interview, don't forget to click it.
Hello everyone, and hello with me I have Alexandra. I think that's how I should
Hello.
pronounce your name.
Yes, perfectly. And you can call me Alex as well. I just thought I should put in my full name because that's how it appears on my book. And some people then have to ask, what shall I call you? Alex, Alexandra is fine.
Okay, and we just in the pre-talk we talked about where we are, and oops,
Yes.
somehow my screen disappeared a little bit, so it's a little bit hard for me. Yeah, so I'm in Belgium, in Ghent, and you're in Australia, and the exact location, what is it? Sandringham, if I'm correct.
Sandringham. Yeah, you've got it bang on there. God, that's a fun little trick that you just did, Eves. Yeah, a long
Yeah,
way
it's
away.
I like to do it to bring people, to show people a little bit, and that we're very far away. And let's bring you back on screen here. And here in Belgium, that is just 15 minutes after 10 o'clock in the evening. And what's the time on your side?
15 minutes after 8 o'clock in the morning.
So we're
Yeah.
and this is in the morning on Monday or on
On
Tuesday?
Tuesday. So
On
I'm
Tuesday
speaking to you. This is
from
what
the
I like to
future.
say from the future. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. I'm glad that I can talk to the future. That's what I was thinking. So indeed, this is one of the advantages of all these digital tools that we can talk both from the places where we want to talk, and time zones and everything away. So, Alex or Alexandra, before we jump into the questions, could you give a small introduction to yourself? What do you want people to know about you?
Yeah. Okay. So my name's Alex. I live in Melbourne, Australia. I have 3 children and a beautiful husband and 54 years old. I don't know what else can I tell you about me. Like you don't necessarily want to start off with this is my job, this is my career, but
Right.
I guess this is a work-related podcast, so interview. So um, me and my co-founder Tony run a boutique consultancy called Reboot Co. We've been doing that for about 7 years. Prior to that, I was in roles of technology leadership and also consulting. So I started off my career as a consultant, did a lot of all of the kind of roles inside of teams, software development, business analysis, team leading. I eventually worked my way up to project management in those days. And then I went into kind of end user computing, we used to call it. So, working for the actual client in technology leadership roles, up to kind of head of digital engineering at some pretty big companies, and then went back to consulting. So then we started our consultancy, Reboot Co., and now we help organizations implement better ways of working. Of course, that includes agile, lean, systems thinking, design thinking, product development stuff. But ultimately, it's just about better ways of working. Let's make these processes more efficient. Let's make them more sort of human centric and see if we can speed up your delivery, but also make it more enjoyable for the people that are in the teams doing the work. So that's kind of what I do every day today. Yeah.
And you didn't mention it now, but you mentioned it just before. This is your book that you've
This
written.
is my book. Thank you very much for putting it up. I can even do a snap and do that. Ooh.
Ah,
Yeah, so I wrote a book it was published in 2023, Empowered Agile Transformation Beyond the Framework. And the intention of the book was just to be able to give it to leaders inside companies and say, this agile transformation stuff doesn't have to be hard. It has a high failure rate. Why is that? Let's give people almost a guidebook of how they could help navigate through that. And what I've also found is like a lot of agile coaches contact me and say that they love the book because a lot of, I guess, what I talk about is what agile coaches are thinking and suffer with a lot in their heads, these challenges of big organizations and big transformation. So yeah, I get a lot of feedback like, oh my God, it's like hearing myself while I read this book. So
that's really nice.
if you
Especially
want to read a
from your
validating,
peers.
if you want to read a validating book as an agile coach, it's probably not a bad one to pick up. Yeah.
So thank you for writing it.
Thank you for sharing that.
Let's jump into that very first question. What is something that people usually don't know about you, but has influenced you in who you are?
Yeah, that great question. I sort of had two answers. I was going to talk about discovering agility quite early on, which I think you did as well, Eves, if I'm correct, like late 90s. Would that be correct for you as well?
That is correct for me as well, yes.
Yeah, and well, I guess what maybe a lot of people don't know about me was that I lived for 8.5 years in the UK. So I finished my technology degree in England because I had itchy feet and I really wanted to travel. My parents that both came from England, so I had a British passport. So I went over to England, finished my degree, and started working in England, and also in Ireland for a bit as well. Did that for a bunch of years before I returned to Australia, where I was from, and that meant that just the timing of it meant that I was around when a lot of the kind of agile movement was kicking off in Europe. And it was, at the time, it was just kind of like what we were excited by, what we did. We went to a lot of meetups. That's where I met like-minded people. And I ended up working for Thoughtworks in the UK. And Thoughtworks were going through a massive boom, because they were one of the first companies that really kind of said, hey, these ways of working are essential to how we work, where we believe in XP. And this is before even the term agile had sort of taken off. So that was like a real kind of buoyant time for me. And I guess it was the age I was at the time as well, as kind of at the start of my career. So I think, but I think maybe some people who know me know that about me. So I don't know if that's super interesting. But the other thing I was going to mention, if I can, was that a lot of people don't know that I started off my work life as a lab technician in a pharmaceutical company. So
wow,
I dropped out of uni.
That's a completely different thing.
I know, but I do think it has influenced something of how I do things today. And I picked myself up the other day, picked up that I was doing something that I think I probably learned that in the lab, And so it was a pharmaceutical company. It had a factory attached to it. They made topical pharmaceuticals. They're a well-known brand still in Australia. They're called Ego Pharmaceuticals. And I actually worked there for 5 years. So I dropped out of doing biology at uni and got a job as a lab technician. And I worked in the quality control part of Ego Pharmaceuticals. And quality control meant we made sure the quality of the product was good, the packaging was good, but also the raw materials or the chemicals that went into the product. And so I think that I learnt a lot. Well, I mean, I was 5 years there, so I definitely did, but about, process and methodology and probably a bit, scientific method, that kind of stuff that I think is still in there and still influences how I do things. So the other day I was, telling off my husband for like combining 2 bits of cheese together and putting it back in the fridge. I was, because I'd worked in a microbiology lab, I could say, no, you can't do that. That's food contamination. So I'm sure that some of those little habits and, perhaps I'm, more aware of some things because of that. So I think when I had a think about your questions, I think that's something that people don't know about me that definitely influences or has influenced who I am today.
And could you you gave an example of the fridge? Is that also because you talked about quality control? Is that also how you look, for example, at code and things like that? Is that related?
I think it's just. It was my initial frustration, even in discovering better ways of working, my frustration at going into the workplace and being on a software delivery team and engaging in this thing that was masquerading as a process, which was waterfall at the time, or in England, it was called SSADM. And thinking, okay, well, I'd learned this at uni. This is the way that we go about doing software. Follow the process faithfully. And the results were just so terrible. And just that feeling of this is not a quality process. there has to be a better way. Like if this was a quality process and we followed the process, we would end up with a quality product. So I think
Because you
it
experienced that in your earlier experience. You just knew a
exactly.
quality process into chemicals will give a superior product, because that's how it's about life. So I guess it has to be, if we're talking about chemicals and everything,
Yeah.
right?
You're right. And I probably haven't even thought about that deeply, Eves, but yes, you're right. Like you can't make a good product out of bad ingredients. There are tolerances, of course, but like if your bottle caps don't fit your bottle, the lid's going to come off. It's customer dissatisfaction. Like if one of your raw materials is contaminated, then the product is going to separate, or it gets to a certain temperature and it's just not going to perform any longer. So yeah, you can't. Good ingredients makes a good product. It's a great way of putting it, Eves. Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's you're not the first on the show. Of course, I can't remember at this particular time, but there was someone who did something more or less similar, in a way. Again, there is something about quality processes from the outside world. If you bring that into IT, we're not at the same level. Of course, we as industry, we don't exist for that long, of course.
Yep.
If you compare
Exactly.
it to a lot of other stuff, so we're just in the infancy of IT, I would say, compared to a lot of other things that we're creating as humans. Although it sometimes feels, and I really like how you say it, like the waterfall process or whatever that process was, it was meant to be about quality, but the end result was unpredictable and was definitely not quality. And
Exactly.
by now, I would say we have a lot more data that shows that other ways, and a lot more research that shows that other ways, agile ways of working, there is a lot of research that shows that this is actually working.
So much research, and I mean, even that is fascinating to me, is because back in the early days, we were kind of like, oh, we couldn't wait for everyone to learn these ways of working, because then things would just be better for everyone. We were a little bit evangelical. I guess anyone who still calls themselves an agile coach probably is a bit evangelical, but we were kind of like, well, let us share this kind of great concept with you, this great news, thinking, it won't be long before everyone is doing this. This is a superior way of building things, but it's surprising how long it has taken for people to catch on to that. And also, we had a lot of steps to overcome, issues to overcome. And I think in the early days of agility, people were saying, well, what about documentation? How do we do that? Oh, well, we've solved documentation. We have these things called stories, and we have these things called, like our repos where we can track changes and stuff. What about regulation? Oh, here's some examples of working in this way in very highly regulated industries. So one by one, we're sort of knocked off these "it can't be done, it's not possible" objections. And yet still there are some companies where it's not the default. And that is just bananas to me. And this whole agile is dead debate really kind of amuses me, because do we really want to go back to that really high failure rate of how we used to deliver software? I don't think we do. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think anyone's going to go back to really high risk ways of shipping software. It won't be fast enough. It'll be too error prone. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had a similar kind of conversation with someone last week where we said, okay, there is, how would I say it? We're sometimes we can discuss it, did agile succeed or not, but and we sometimes see in companies that they do waterfallish processes, but they're way smaller than they used to be. Like before, the projects were 2 years, maybe 5 years, and I hardly see these kind of things. Even in the bad companies where they have processes that take a lot longer than they should take. It's 3 months, 6 months before some things get published, and things do get feedback. Again, not at the level that I would like it to happen, but much better than it was 20 years ago, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. There's still like, though, there's some, big products, big vendor products or customizable off the shelf software products that tend to have one engagement model, which is it's going to be a big rollout, it's going to be a big implementation, and it's quite hard to fight. And unfortunately, that's what big companies often go for, is like some big tool, because they usually come with big sales processes around them, and they're in a sales cycle for a couple of years. So I agree with what you're saying. Like no kind of like custom software is probably built in those big batch ways, but there's still a lot of improvement that we can make in how we implement
I definitely agree.
software. Yes, I don't think we would argue with each other on that score. Yeah,
I think there is a lot of improvement, and in a way, if I would look back at what I wanted us to be 20 years ago, I would really be disappointed in where we are. And still, at some points, I think we did move forward. But it feels like it's always going back and forth a little bit. Or at least
what do
that's
you
how
think?
It feels to me.
Yeah, I'm curious about what you think was the tipping point because there was a time, and I don't know exactly what year it was, but there was a point where everyone wanted to be an agile team, and how can we do this faster? And I have my own personal theories about why that is, but I'd love to hear what you think.
It started to reverse the roles here, but okay, let's jump into that more shortly. For me, what I think at some point, like you said, everybody wanted to do agile, and somehow a lot of companies were wanted to do agile, but at the same time didn't want to do the investments. And I think somehow a lot of that got done too quickly, and I think that's where I see a lot of negative. Where in the beginning it was a lot harder to convince people to go for agile, but the ones that we convinced, they did it more or less properly with the right coaching and whatever. And somehow that companies wanted to move faster into agile, but less thoroughly. And then, of course, you have a lot more other people that have less experience. And for me, a big part of it is that you talked about Thoughtworks, you talked about XP. Technical excellence is really important in XP. I think it was also. I didn't work at Thoughtworks, but I know so many great people who worked there, and I think especially in the beginning, everybody really was. Thoughtworks was really about also technical excellence. The first continuous integration server was built there, and was so there was a lot of technical excellence was in the beginning of that community, and at somehow that focus got away from technical excellence, and it moved much more into the managerial part, which to quote Laurent Bossavit, which was the easy part of agile in a way.
Yes, I agree with that. Like, and I remember being at Thoughtworks at Egg Bank, actually, which I don't even know exists as a bank in the UK anymore. It was part of the Prudential back then. And we had to do a lot of education about XP. Like literally there were classes running every week about what is XP. This great guy, Oliver, I can't remember his surname, French guy, would run these classes to kind of teach the rest of technology and also their business stakeholders what was this thing called XP. It was called the XP game, I think, that you can still kind of find online, I believe. And even after, everyone did their one day of sort of immersion of XP, it was still very hard and needed a lot of coaching in order to get people to actually really engage in it. And to their credit, they really did. We had people pairing a Thoughtworks developer with an Egg Bank developer every day in order to kind of help these teams and these individuals learn those practices. But then what I observed happening at the same time was people kept going off to do this kind of 2-day Scrum training at the same time to, learn as much of these ways of working as we could. And people would come back from the Scrum training, even the XP dudes would come back from the Scrum training and go like, oh, you know what? That's just so easy. It makes sense. It's really easy to communicate to stakeholders. We don't have to teach them about things like test-driven development. And it almost became a shortcut into better ways of working. Don't burden yourself with the technical practices. Let's just, like you say, talk about the managerial aspects. And I think in some ways, Scrum was kind of like a detriment to the whole agile movement, as well as being the thing that made it spread so wildly because of its ease of adoption.
Yeah, and I
Yeah,
think it's both a blessing and a curse, because
yeah,
without that spread, would we even be talking about agile at this point? I have no idea.
exactly, exactly.
Definitely not at this large scale, but at the same. So yeah, it. I'm always going back and forth. At one way, it could be a gateway drug into much more companies into agile,
Hmm.
but yeah, like you say, not always in the best way. Still, at the
Mm.
same time, I see people that were taught agile in a bad way that then look forward and do their research and look into what's behind and then learn much more. So yeah, that's
Yeah,
still, and they
that's
wouldn't
true.
have been in touch with it without Scrum. So yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah.
always a little bit, yeah, looking. The person I think you talked about with XP game, the XP game was invented in Belgium by Pascal van
Oh,
Cauwenberghe and Vera Peeters, but it was spread
ah,
basically around the world.
yeah,
So
it's so,
yeah.
and so fun. Such a great way to learn, and maybe that is part of why kind of games still factor in a way in
Mm,
a lot of the sort of agile learning, which is, I mean, even that is interesting and fascinating too, because we don't question that at the time, but at the time, other companies were doing this awful stuff to themselves, like the worst kind of, what were they called? Like your RUPs and your
mm,
enterprise relationship programs, and like submitting not just process frameworks, but software frameworks that worked in a particular way that supposedly meant that you never had to document. And those were really terrible, that really kind of terrible, dysfunctional, boring ways of working that didn't work. And to then have this kind of game playing happening at the other side of the spectrum, with paired with better ways of like creating software and having it be defect free, and having it being developed faster, it was just like chalk and cheese, really. But one of the things I think really in probably, I'm observing in Australia, and I'm assuming it's going to be the same for the rest of the world because by then I'd returned to Australia, was I think it's these mobile phones is what
mm,
made a lot of the barriers to agility go away, and in particular the app marketplace. Because once people realized, oh my God, everyone's on these phones and everyone wants an app, there needs to be an app for everything. How can we build these things faster? These little companies sprang up, this kind of entrepreneurial spirit sprang up, and we couldn't build good quality apps using those old ways of working. And so, like, little businesses sprang up everywhere, but also big companies wanted apps. They were really hungry for
mm,
apps. And if you had some app development teams inside your kind of big technology department, no one cared about how they were developing software. They were just like, just build that stuff fast. So I think that
mm.
it was maybe an intersection of the two things, the development of the smartphone and the fact that it had an app marketplace that suddenly everyone wanted a piece of. They could see, oh my God, some people are buying apps, selling apps for $1 and making all of this money.
Mm.
So perhaps
Well,
perhaps it was
especially
to do with that.
because we're also with apps, we're used to like installing new software on our computers back at that time. It's like, oh, I'm not sure if I want that. My phone updates the apps automatically, and I don't care. For me, it's like fine. Once in a
Yeah.
while, when there is an app that moves well. For example, my partner had an older phone at some point, and the app auto updated, but then didn't work on her phone anymore because the phone was too old. That's the few occasions when it's a problem. In most cases, with with yeah, modern
Yeah.
phones, that's never a problem, I would say.
Yes. And I'm just going to reach for a book as well, that exactly as you say, once the phones were updating themselves overnight, suddenly this became very
Hmm.
important. Like suddenly
Okay.
this became relevant and necessary. We need to have continuous delivery, because we're going to be making rapid changes to this thing all the time. So I think, yeah, probably the intersection of all of those things, or the evolution of all of those things, had something to do with that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. We're only into the first question. I'm already talking.
Oh, sorry.
to
Yes,
Vera.
let's go
No,
faster.
I know, but I love it. I really love it. So let's indeed jump to that second question. If you had not been doing what you've been doing now, what could have become of you?
Or what will become of me, Eves? Because if anything,
I love this twist.
the pace of change means that we can do anything, right? We've got unlimited access to knowledge, and we can learn stuff. And you already graciously talked about the book, and for me, I believe that it would have been writing of some kind. And I say that because as a young child, I can remember always being observed to be an imaginative person, and not actually in a positive way. Like, Alex, you're always in a dream. That's what my dad used to say to me all the time. Like, you're always dreaming, you're daydreaming. And I remember having a very fertile imagination at the time, and, like having terrible nightmares because I could just imagine scary things happening in my head all the time. And I did love writing as a kid. I'm sure a lot of kids do love storytelling and writing. And when I was working in England, I took myself off to do like a creative writing course just as a night course thing. Before you have children, you do all of these, you've got all this time on your hands, so you do these things. And I really loved it. And so I think that writing would be what I would do. I would love to, writing a book was a bucket list thing for me. I would love to write a novel. So yeah, that's what I think. I love.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's kind of in my personality. I love writing. I love the process of, crafting something. That's kind of like my version of making something, I guess. And so I could imagine myself being satisfied doing that. And under no illusions would people have to read it. It's just like, what would I, if money wasn't an issue and all of that, I can imagine that I would have picked that as a career, and I would have been very happy. Yes. And I may still be very happy. Who knows?
The way you explained it, especially at the end, reminds me of a person from Ghent who actually had a software company and sold it. So he made, I don't know how much, but he made enough money so he can do the rest of his life what he wants. And that's actually what he's doing. He's been writing books and short stories ever since, because he's like, and he doesn't care if it brings money or not. Of course, he prefers that it will, that people are reading it. But yeah, he just spends his time doing that because that's, like you say, he doesn't have to worry about money and anything anymore. And then writing becomes that part. So yeah, it's definitely.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And it's a very accessible thing now. Like I love writing a blog still. Like you can write a blog in a day and get it pushed out. And I find that very gratifying to do that. And then, because you can put a blog onto our website, we can see if anyone's clicked it and read it. And that is like, that's awesome feedback. And through the process of writing a book, I learned about, how to kind of write and publish your own book, which is, much more accessible to us today than it ever was because of technology as well.
Oh, yeah, I agree. That's a really big part of changes again in all kind of directions, but for books again also very much. You can, like you say, you can basically write a blog and then turn it into a book and then have it picked up, or based on the feedback that you get from earlier readers, your book will become better again. And then we have all these kind of tools that help out to self-publish if we want that, or send it out to multiple people and get feedback in multiple kind of ways. So really interesting. Other parts, and in a way not other part, because you did write a book, and so you did spread some gospel, like you said it earlier on.
It's really interesting. After you write a book, I find there was a big, what shall I do now after that, because it had been a bucket list thing for so long, and suddenly, like, the world of possibilities opened. I could do this, I could do that, what should I do next? And that's kind of a nice place to get to. at my age, because you're halfway through your days on this planet, I guess, and so you want to make sure that you spend the second half in as valuable way as you can.
Yeah, I recognize it as well. So I still in my mind hope that or think that I'm 24 or something, but having a child that is 22, that's physically impossible. So yeah, I have to admit that I'm past the 50s. So I guess the first part of my life is gone at least. That's for sure. And then I think, just like you, I think indeed a lot about, okay, what do I still want to do? Is this worth my time doing this or that? That's definitely. And that brings us, that's a kind of a challenge. And that brings me to that next question. What do you consider at this point your biggest challenge? And of course, the biggest challenge that you want to put openly on the internet.
Yes. So I think my biggest challenge, and it's kind of like still a big growth area for me, is, like we are boutique as a consultancy. The biggest we've been is 12 people, and that felt kind of hectic at the time. So what happens
and so
when
you're
we go
smaller now? You're smaller again, or
so we're smaller now. We're shrunk down a bit. There's not heaps of consulting work at the moment around Melbourne, which is fine. We've got a model where we can kind of scale up and scale down. We work with people that we know really well and we've worked with before. In fact, at the moment, one of the people we're working with, I used to work at Thoughtworks with back in the early 2000s. He happened to be an Australian, moved back to Australia like I did, and now he's working for Reboot Co. and one of our clients. So that's thrilling. But yeah, we tend to work with the same people that we've known from past lives, or experienced people that we know and trust with our clients. So I guess we would consider what we do is kind of high value for our clients, because it comes with people that have got a lot of experience, both in consulting, but also, often have been leaders inside organizations themselves. So they have traversed the rocky road of change and transformation themselves. So a challenge for me personally is we often get edged out of gigs that might be kind of going quite well and heading in the right direction by big consulting firms. And it's can be super annoying, and I try not to be annoyed about it, because you feel like you're making a bit of progress and people are listening. But if you're in a company of a decent size, you'll get other execs that are trying to, through nothing malicious, they're trying to learn and grab onto this thing faster. And how can we scale it more rapidly? Or we need to do this now, or, I need to do this in my area. And there have been occasions where we've been suddenly the machine of big consultancy kind of like lands into the organization, and then you end up wasting time in having conflict. Like I hate it when there's tons of consultancies at the same organization, and we spend time debating whose approach is better, or they use some very blunt force models, such as, we have 2,000 Scrum Masters, we're just going to ship them all in, just follow this process, like here is the 300-page slide deck. And I guess what I'm annoyed about is that whatever I haven't learned means that it has happened time, more than one time, let's say. And it's something that I just need to learn how to communicate better, or, work on our messaging better, or, clearly I haven't found the answer yet, but that's, I think my biggest challenge is, and something that my book is trying to address, which is you don't need a big kind of takeover transformation that's very, very costly to the client, and predetermines how it will go. You can actually get more results if you actually move more organically, sense and adapt, look at where you are, what needs to change, what needs improving next. And I've seen it not even with our company, with other companies that you think are kind of doing a great job, and then they get swept out of the way before, no, we're just going to move to quarterly planning, we're just going to do it like a robotic thing. And what offends me so much about it is the result isn't better, but also the people don't like it. So you end up with these people in teams that are kind of like, just, now working quite robotically. This is how sprint planning will work. This is how quarterly planning will work. And I think it just makes it harder for organizations and the teams particularly to be successful in those models. So yeah, that's something that I'm constantly working on is, trying to pitch our work in correctly, and make it successful for the client. But I don't want to be inside a client's being a hater and bagging out big consultancies or framework approaches the whole time, because I want to recognize that there are some great things that they bring. They bring awareness at the exec level maybe that would never happen if it's just me and my co-founder and the organizations of a
because they can
size.
reach out to that level where you don't have the network, I would say.
Yeah, and normally our like I do work with leaders a lot more these days, which is lovely. But usually it's just like one person that has sponsored us in that, we might know personally because we've worked on a gig in the past together. Yeah, so that's something that I think is a challenge. And if anyone has the answers to that, I would love them to reach out and give me the answers.
Well, and that's the second part of that question is, why is that a good thing for you? And I'm hearing that you don't have the answers, but is there something that is good about that challenge for you? Something that you can see already now? What's
well, I guess
for you about that?
Yeah. What is good about it? Maybe I'm not answering the question right.
No, but it's that's it is.
I think it's just good
that
to
I didn't ask yet.
Yeah. But it is good to have a challenge and to have something that you think you need to be better at, especially like 7 years into running this business with Tony, my co-founder. You don't want it to be just a repetitive model. This is how we do it. Go in, fix it up. Like it's nice to have challenge in your work and to have to use your brain to think through what the solutions might be. So I suppose having that still in front of me is a good thing, because there's probably different ways to attack this beast that would create some growth for me. And, I suspect it's probably making more relationships with those big consultancies might not be a bad idea. But I don't know if I've got it in me to give up all my principles and beliefs to do that. Like, when we worked at Thoughtworks in the early days, one of the great things that they had was they had this scale, so you would go into a gig and people would learn about these new ways of working, and because it was Thoughtworks, they were connecting at the right levels, and leaders changed their behaviors. Like you were talking about that earlier, like people tried to do it in the right ways back in those days. And we were really able to have those deeper conversations about changing behaviors, not just changing process. And I really enjoyed that about being in Thoughtworks, because you could be quite opinionated about what was the right way to do things and what was the wrong way to do things. And that's something that definitely all the thought workers had in common back then, was they were opinionated people, right?
They still are. Most of even the ones that left, they're still opinionated.
Yeah. I love that. I love that about that kind of those people. Even though we spent a lot of time being frustrated about things,
But I think you challenged each other as well. I guess at a level that you all grown. No, again, I wasn't there, so I don't know how much internal discussions were at Thoughtworks, but knowing
a lot
people,
of
I can think so. I guess that helped become better, all of you, because there were very smart people being very opinionated, and so if you had an idea, you better be good at explaining it and thinking it through, because otherwise, these other people might rip you off. Well, maybe in a gentle way, but they will still call your bluff, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, it was definitely like a hotbed of knowledge workers doing their best, thinking through things, and also ultimately making it real through code, right? Like, because I'd worked in another consultancy before Thoughtworks, and there was a lot of selling PowerPoints, pre-salesy talk about how amazing things would be, but really at Thoughtworks they really did make it real in the code,
So
and you
it
could
was not
see.
just discussing; it was using the code to prove they're right in a way.
Exactly. You can see all of our acceptance tests running. Here's the overnight run. Here's the run that's running every time I check in my code. So it was almost like indisputable that this was high quality stuff that was being built. So yeah. Anyway, that's my challenge.
I really like it, and it's I love mostly when people bring here a challenge that they haven't figured out, because that is your biggest challenge. If you have already halfly figured it out, there's probably already another bigger challenge waiting to be solved.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of us we jump into that, like, okay, how do you work, especially with larger clients? Other people might be in there because they want to sell, like you say, 1,000 scrum masters that can help a problem, but in many cases they create a problem, or the problem becomes bigger and it's much more complex and harder to solve. And if you
Yeah.
work in a smaller way, you have much more chances of getting to success and then growing over time. But that's not how most of these big consultancy companies want to work. Well, and this kind of thing, I think it can create and take a lot of energy. And so,
Mm.
what drives you? What gives you still that
Mm.
energy to go and work with these clients?
Yeah. I mean, I guess what drives me. So I think it's in the early days, I was definitely financially driven. Like, I didn't grow up with lots of money. We were just very kind of working class family. And I sort of understood that in order to sort of level the playing field for me, I had to become educated in order to, in order to just have the same opportunities that other people had. And by no means were we poor family. Like, I'm talking about like when everyone was kind of working class and, um, you know, pre-internet days, and mortgages were cheap, and living wage was fine. But I really did have, I guess, aspirations to improve my life, and I saw education as a way of doing that. And so I think I was driven a long time by money. Actually, that sounds very terribly materialistic, but that was
But I
definitely
like
the
that. I think
case.
these were also the times. I think all
Mm,
the movies and everything they talked about success, and it was almost like you had to make money, and because that was gave you a better life. There was a lot of times that it gave that I don't know, that whole, I don't wouldn't say the industry, but our lives looked like that was the goal. I think for a lot
totally.
of
Yeah.
people. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the way you explained it, it feels like that has changed, that has shifted.
Yeah, definitely. And also, even when I was kind of earning the greatest money of my career, was probably when I was in technology leadership roles, actually. Um, and even then, though, it I was always bugged by injustice in work, injustice in everything, but injustice in work and unfairness. And so, when I see the kind of things that used to bug me was organizational leaders or organizations believing that there was something wrong with their tech department or their tech team. They're too slow, they're not fast enough. And when you have a deeper knowledge of what's going on inside, you realize actually the problems are being generated by some of you, all of you organization leaders, asking for things by dates, coming up with ideas that are not good business ideas, um, you know, not allowing enough time for us to create a quality product. So I think that kind of injustice I try to kind of solve using these ways of working that have become so ingrained in how people like me and probably you, Eves, think about things. So break the problem down. Let's build a test first. Let's get something of quality working. Let's give something to the customer. So I'm always trying to apply those things. They feel very natural to me to situations that might be a little unjust. And I always hated that. Oh, technology is slow, or like I think there are in 3 different organizations I've had to implement an estimation process, and it's absolutely killed me. The first time I entered into it in good faith, going, yeah, let's implement an estimation process, and then we'll end up with better estimates, and then the team will be allowed to build what they need to build and in the right time. And then you just end up engaging in this terrible estimation process. It goes round and round and round, and the numbers keep getting bigger, and nothing about the solution is improving while you're coming up with these numbers. And so I've engaged in that 3 times and then just kind of said, no more.
What I'm hearing is that the numbers keep getting bigger, but the estimation itself are not more predictable. Is that what you said?
Nothing's more predictable. We don't know anything more about the solution. It's actually causing more conflict because that number, when we say, oh, we think it'll be released by June, people go, June? Are you joking? We need it by May. And then you go back at the number and there's like, well, now we think we can do it by August. Like, it just engages in this unnecessary conflict at too early stage where, the cone of uncertainty is so wide and we don't really know what we're building, or so all of those sort of wrong behaviors. So I think to try and bring it back to answer your question a bit, I really don't like the injustice of things at work when they reflect negatively on people, especially tech people. I have a real soft spot for my techie background. And I'm always trying to sort of let's get to a better answer and implement a better way of finding out, and stop engaging in these kind of like waste of time, negative activities, a waste of time activities that just cause conflict. Can we just get to a better result? So I don't know. Does that drive me? Yeah. So it means that I tend to see improvement opportunities everywhere, and that can be very distracting. Sometimes you just need to focus on the main game, and
I like that. And yeah, it means that, and that's a real big shift from the money part, where it's really about, okay, how can we focus back to what's improving people's life? Because what I'm hearing, maybe I'm paraphrasing or I'm hearing things that you didn't say, but what I'm hearing is that, okay, I've tried that estimation part because, okay, there is a client that wants something, so I'll try to help them out. I can do it once and I failed. Okay, I'll try it the next time they ask me, because maybe we did something wrong or whatever. But after 3 times, they're like, no, this is really not helping. So let's stop doing that and let's focus on what does help the people. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right. And you were right about the money part too. Like, if I reflect, the money part was solved a long time ago, and and I do not know why. Why you kind of, like you say, we maybe grew up in the 80s as young kids, so we were just influenced by, what looks like success and what is successful. But in reality, that has been solved for me. Like, for a couple of decades, there has been no worry about money. So it cannot be money that is really still driving me. It's nice when you have enough to do nice things, but really I have a very low maintenance life, actually. I have a very boring car. We don't have fancy holidays really. More of it gets channeled into my, adult children. But yeah, for me, there is definitely something more underlying, which is a bit of kind of justice and equality in the workplace. And it filters through to everything, because it means that you want people to have a good time at work. You want them to be treated fairly, to be given opportunities. And, I probably defend individuals and people beyond where maybe it's even fair to do so, to the point where maybe I could be blind about actually someone is taking advantage here, or there are individuals here that are not performing. I just kind of have this sort of belief in, well, it's the system of work that is letting that to happen. But yeah, I kind of do strongly believe in a just workplace, and it filters into everything, I think.
And that's definitely a big drive. That's for many people, but I'm hearing it also in these kind of stories. And I kind of heard it in the first part of your explanations in the other part of the story. So let's move to that next question, and that's about what do you consider your biggest achievement? And so basically, what I'm noticed in when I'm asking this question, this is basically your moment to brag and to be really proud. But is that easy for you, Alex, to be proud? Is that something?
I mean, that's a good question, isn't it? Is it easy for you, Eves?
I think I got better over time, and so yeah, I think it's easy. But what I've noticed, but then I really want to hear your answer, is that it's much easier for me to be proud of my children when my children achieved something than if I achieved something, and so that made me think, like, for myself, is it so hard to not brag? I can brag about the book that my daughter wrote, but I won't brag about the books that I write. It's like that doesn't feel correct. So that helped me. So, but how is it?
Yeah, it is similar, I think. Like, I think obviously we all have an ego, right? And I don't mind now doing things like this. I don't mind speaking on stage. That I overcame that in 2009. I think it was I spoke at Agile Australia. That was a huge thing for me. Like, I literally did 2 months of prep, more prep than I've probably ever done in a talk since, because I kind of wanted it to go really well, and I sort of understood, and I suppose I admired other speakers for being good speakers. So I thought, I'm going to make this a thing, and I'm going to kind of do it well. And now I don't have a problem talking on stage. I mean, it's always anxiety beforehand. Like, I'm not a magical person. That's as normal for everyone, but I'm okay to do it. So obviously I have an ego. I don't mind standing up there and being the center of attention for certain things. So, but it is still difficult when people give you praise. And I think you just kind of want to bat it away. And I don't know why that is, Eves. Like you almost want to minimize it and say, oh, well, I did a lot of prep, or, oh, well, I have a great team around me. So it is, I think, difficult for people to take compliments. I totally get that. And in terms of why is that, I think it's because I really don't know why. I don't know why. Why is it so hard to accept compliments or actually internalize them and say, I did do that really well? I think it is easier as you get older. Maybe it's just like you create more opportunities for it, so then more come and you kind of get used to it. It's hard to take something, a compliment or good feedback, graciously. I tell you what is lovely, not to keep talking about the book again, and you will have experienced this as an author of books, is when people thank you for writing the book and say it improved my life in some way. I think that is incredibly nice to get back as feedback, even if it's like, I mean, I haven't had millions of people doing that, but I've had a few, and that has been incredibly gratifying. And the kind of things I forward on to my husband and go, have a look at this. Someone bought 13 copies and ran a class around the book. And I was like, God, that's incredible. That's huge. Like, that made me feel super good about the fact that that happened and I'd done that. So I'll just say book is greatest achievement. It feels like it.
I can definitely understand that, and especially if you talk about other people doing the exact same job as that we're doing, saying, "Hey, I really like that book." I didn't keep, because I don't keep track of the number of people talking about which book, because that's again a lot more administration for the podcast. But I know that at least 2 or 3 times that people talked about this book, about your book. So it came up already a few times. So that is definitely something that is worth mentioning as an achievement. So yeah. I do.
And for Eves, Is yours this Who is Agile? Would you say that's your
It's it was the first book that I published, the Who's Agile, as an ebook, but not as a physical book. But then, yeah, I've done a couple. I wrote a lot of what is it? Manuals for workshops. You talked about the XP game before. I've created similar kind of games, and I had been turning them into PDFs or things to download. And at some point, I thought, oh, it's actually much better to all upload them or convert them to Leanpub books, because then people who play the game can buy it, can have the latest versions. If I make updates to the books, then they get that. So that's why I have a lot of these books out on Leanpub. But the one that for me made most impact is what is it? 89 tips from the trenches, from the agile trenches, where I asked people from around the world to give tips, agile tips, and that I turned in the end. I also turned into a physical book, because that was the first where I thought, okay, it actually makes sense to have it as a physical book. But I only did that after I turned an ebook for my daughter into a physical book. And that's part of that story. I was like, it was so logical for me to turn the book for my daughter into a physical book. And I did that before I even thought about one of my own books. For, the thing I said, it's so much easier to be proud there, and it felt so much more logical to turn that into a physical book than to turn one of my own before.
That's impressive. How old's your daughter?
She's now 17, but I think she was 14 at the time.
Incredible.
So that's it's I don't want to go too much into the story, but basically what she did, she was part of Code Dojo, so she learned how to program at, I think, age 10 or 11, something like that. And she followed a certain workshop on a certain technology, and she came back really frustrated, because what they asked her to do was basically a kind of programming exercise that took, let's say, 2-3 hours. And turns out that she made a very stupid mistake in the first 5 minutes. But in that whole exercise, there was no feedback loop until the very end. So at the end, she had to try it, and it didn't work. And it took her like half an hour to find back that error. And I do remember driving her back home, and she was really complaining and said, oh, but they created it wrong. They should have done it this and it, the way we done it at Code Dojo. Like every 5 minutes, I should see what's working and then continue, then do another thing, see it's working. And so I pushed back a little bit, and I said in the car, like, okay, I don't know the exact things, but in the end, the year after that, she did create a similar kind of workshop on that technology, on an exercise that did exist before, but that she turned into a smaller, so into 10.
She's a natural.
So much more natural, and that again was a workshop turned into a manual, turned into an ebook, turned into a physical book. But yeah, I did the all the heavy lifting for turning it into a physical book, working with Leanpub and publishing it. But the writing, she did everything.
Isn't that
Because
amazing?
I did a lot of that last part that I said. For her, it feels less like her book, but for me, it's like, no. You wrote everything, and I just helped you in doing.
Yeah.
But if she would have worked with a publisher,
Exactly. You were just her publishing company, really.
Exactly. That's the same thing. But of course, at now 4 or 5 years later, she's totally no longer interested in these kind of things. As for her, it's
what a
something in the
shame.
past. But this is, I think this is typical the kind of age, and well, maybe in a couple of years she will be again proud that she did that at that young age. So
Yeah. Incredible.
So I want to move to that next one, because what do you consider? Do you have a personal agility tip to share?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's very kind of general. I don't know how it's going to come across as a tip, but it's, I suppose, taken me until this age to keep banging my head against things over and over again, but to really release yourself from this idea that anything can be planned. And I think, a lot of the time we use these ways of working to sort of improve upon something that we have it as a planned idea in our head. So we apply these ways of working, and it helps. No doubt it helps. We want to get here. We think that we have this really clear vision of what here is. Let's use those ways of breaking down the work, breaking down the goals, working in steps, working incrementally, and get to where we want to go. And that definitely works. That's definitely better than trying to get there in one leap, like that big batch. Do it once, do it to perfection, and hope that you're right at the end. But I think that I just keep proving the lesson to myself over and over again, that how you think is going to go and how you believe that you can plan your way to something, it's just not possible. So it's really just giving up that idea that you can get to the planned step in the way that you thought you can.
Yeah, in
And
a
so
way that planning is important, but the plan is useless, something like that.
yeah, planning. Let's just keep planning, because it's just we keep proving it to ourselves, or I keep proving it to myself over and over again. Well, that didn't go the way I thought it would. But lots of side benefits and beneficial things that I learned along the way. And, maybe I wish that I didn't have that plan in my head in that way. Maybe if I'd forced myself to engage a bit more in the present, and, pushed myself to release something earlier, it may have gone differently. And it sort of goes for everything. So it goes for that workshop that I'm delivering this afternoon. It goes to that training course that we were going to build. Like, I keep doing it, putting too much effort in, thinking that this is how it's going to go. And when you do that, you're kind of like stealing away the ability to actually probe and sense and adapt and talk to someone and ask them what is really the problem that we need to solve here. So I think, like, I know for myself, to get away from this grandiosity of this is how it's going to go and this is what it's going to be, and really push myself to what is the next smaller step, what is the, let's try and put ourselves through that little discipline of what are you testing here before you go off and spend a whole day delivering this thing that might not be what the client problem is, or thinking that you're going to pitch in, what we do as a business. People aren't interested in listening to that. They want to talk about their problems. So I think it's just like constantly, applying those ways of thinking to ourselves and trying not to engage too much in the great big plan that someone has, or, finding subtle ways to find a little small step inside that great big plan that would be the next best thing that we could do to find the next direction. So I don't know, is that a hot tip? Just give away the idea of the plan.
I think a lot of us, we keep struggling with it, and of course, in theory, it's a perfect idea that planning, and it is, like I said, that story says, is that the planning is useful. Thinking about it, cutting things in smaller things, but then thinking that it will all go according to that plan is just, I think it hardly ever happens. And
I'm fascinated that someone of my many years of being around these ways of working, and other people I know that are the same, will keep engaging this behavior. Like, how many times we have to...
somehow it but that means that we haven't done it correctly, or we should do it better, or whatever. We keep bumping on our heads and telling us that we didn't do it good enough, or the planning wasn't good enough, where actually we don't know enough about the reality, or maybe the world has changed between the time.
The world changes,
That's That is a really wonderful tip that I think much more people should learn to do. let's move to that next question. What have you learned about remote working?
Oh, the ups and the downs, like just how disengaged we can all be these days. Like, I don't know, I don't know, it's really starting to wear on me when I'm doing things like training sessions online about how people are half engaged. And I don't love it. Like, I know that if I was sitting in one of my classes, I would be the same. I would have another window open because there'd be something else that was drawing my attention, right? But I really, really don't love it. And it's starting to be a little bit depressing. So yeah, I don't know what that means for the future of how can we make learning and workshopping even engaging. Like I do I put a lot of effort now into warm-ups and like icebreakers, and I believe that I've always done that and always felt that it was like a fun way to start a session. But now I just feel like it's absolutely critical to get these people's attention and get them participating very, very early in the piece. So where I might have in the past, started with some slides and discussion and some knowledge, now I will start with, right, let's organize ourselves into teams first. Let's come up with an idea of something that we're going to build first, and actually get their engagement, because we're not physically with each other anymore. And I think, I used to love these in a physical workshop, our posties and our Sharpies, but so I think that is a challenge. But on the upside of remote working, it has reduced global distance for all of us, and today is a great example. But it's meant that I've been open to opportunities that I never ever would have had before. Like Matthew mentioned me because Matthew Skelton, author of Teen Topologies, because we did a workshop together in Manchester, because I was able to go and speak at a conference in Manchester. I said, well, hey, I'm going to be nearby you. Shall we do something together? And we collaborated on that and created that remotely with very little face-to-face time, actually, just using all of the remote tools. And we delivered a one-day masterclass together. And Matthew's coming to Australia this year, and we're probably going to do something as well around that. And, I'm on your podcast, your YouTube channel now, and I've been interviewed by other people. And even within Australia, which is a big country, I'm going to be talking at Agile Perth. I spoke at an organisation a couple of months ago, or a month ago, that was a global mining organisation, and they had people in South Africa, people in England, people in Australia, all doing that little talk and that workshop with me. So I think that it's just made the world a lot smaller. And I think that's amazing, because I came back from England and I kind of didn't have contact with a lot of those people in the UK for the longest time. And now, we can reconnect again. And so I think that what have I learned about remote working is just, it generates opportunities, and I would encourage people just to say yes to those opportunities more. Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, that seems to work off. That's definitely, and that is, so for you, that is something that remote working brought you, because it was easier to reconnect with these people, and
Yeah.
like here.
And just the likelihood of saying yes to people that contact me on LinkedIn from other countries that maybe I wouldn't have pre-COVID, even I wouldn't have bothered to pursue those opportunities, because I would have gone, oh, well, different time zone, whatever. But now there's the number of times I have a call at this time in the morning or late at night, and it doesn't seem to matter. We can still work together and get things done. It's very interesting. I never expected that to be part of my kind of working career that much. I sort of accepted, because I'd worked in a lot of companies that had development teams that were offshore, or development centers that were offshore. So I was used to working with teams that had part of their team offshore, at big companies like REA Group and Invato, like who do that stuff really well. And that was pre-COVID. So I was lucky enough to have seen that and so I kind of understood, oh yeah, software can be built this way and that can be a great thing. But I'm surprised at how much of the work that I do can work that way as well. There was a time when I even had a boss once who said like, oh, you can't do coaching, you can't do agile coaching remotely, it just doesn't work. And now I call BS on that. Like, you can do that. So yeah, I think it's the opportunities and working globally, I think is just kind of, isn't that better for all of us as a planet on this precarious state we find ourselves in on this planet, sharing it together, better to bridge those gaps and to know each other internationally a bit more.
I agree. That's for multiple reasons. But yeah, indeed, the more we know each other, the more we respect each other, and that brings a lot of different things, but also the fact that we don't have to hop on planes all the time again to collaborate. That's also much, much better. Well, first of all, for the planet, but also for our families. Like I said, I think in the pre-talk, I can do all of this from my own home. Okay, it's late in the evening for me, but after this call, I'm just going to be with my family. Everybody, well, no, the oldest is probably not in bed yet, but the others are still sleeping, but still in the morning, I will be with them as well. And that is what remote working brings a lot of that. Let's go to that next question. What's a book that you want to talk about? And I think
you might have them ready.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you already talked briefly about
team topologies.
Why do you like this book so much?
Well, it's the first, it's so, I don't know how you're doing it, Eves, but it's so hard to find time to read books cover to cover now. And yet there are many books that I still want to read. And it's actually embarrassing, the size of my book pile. And Team Topologies, I actually first listened to a couple of years ago as an audiobook, and I really liked it. And then I found myself in a situation at a client where we had some extra funding in order to hire more people because they knew they needed a few more people for a few new initiatives that were popping up. They had a couple of organizational issues that I'd helped them diagnose. One of them was team size. Their teams had become very big. And I could see there were lots of problems. I'd observed the teams in action, and I could see there were issues in that, like leadership teams had formed inside teams, for example, because the team had got to a particular size. Like I'm talking, like 25 people, way too big for an agile team. And the client said, well, what models have you seen for reorganizing? And we did a workshop just on all the different models. Okay, what does a matrix organization look like? What does a bunch of cross-functional teams look like? What does it look like? What do leadership teams look like? Just for me to share with them all the different models I'd seen at lots of different clients and places that I work, to talk about the pros and the cons. What if we have leaders inside of teams? What if we make sure we have leaders that are not inside of teams, that are inside other teams, so we have this kind of like cross way of reporting to people. We don't end up with that kind of coercive manager inside the team. And we're talking through all the options, and I just off the cuff said to the guy who at the time was running tech, oh, have you read the book Team Topologies? And he said, no, I haven't. He went home on the weekend, read the book, came back on Monday, and he said, everyone in the leadership team needs to read this book.
Wow.
So
okay.
I thought, oh crap, I better reread this book. Ordered my physical copy, started reading it. I've got it somewhere like tagged with 1 million tagged bits of information. And I actually, through using it very actively with this client, it became almost like a guidebook for us through that whole process. And I'd already been working with these people. We'd been educating the leaders on ways of working and upping their skills on lean and limiting work in progress and prioritizing and all of these other topics that were really important to their overall system of work. But suddenly it got to the point of now we need to organize ourselves into teams. And that is a very difficult thing to do with the leadership team, right? Because everyone's got skin in the game, like big skin in the game. And so there were some issues that we had to kind of get through as a leadership team, because to the credit of the leaders, or the two leaders in that area, wanted to do it as a collaborative thing with the leadership team, not to kind of like do it in a separate room and do it to them. But we use team topologies as this really effective guidebook. And what I think it does so beautifully is it's domain-driven design, right? So all of us that have worked in technology would agree that domain-driven design is a good idea. You'll end up with well-factored systems that, you know, behave nicely, that follow the value chain, that, you know, release value in the way that we want them. But domain-driven design as a topic on its own is kind of quite opaque to people who are not technology people and haven't come from a big background of technology. Like they might be in product or they might be in design, but they don't want to get so in depth into domain-driven design. So I think what team topologies does is it lifts the topic out of the detail really nicely, makes it very accessible to people who are not deeply in the software. And also it's very empathetic to something that, remember, we talked about drove me, which was the justice part of the work equation. Like, let's not burden teams with too much cognitive load. Let's make sure that they can manage everything that they have to manage, and then they will create, you know, good stuff. So it's almost just like the perfect guidebook for that sort of situation. It has all the great stuff in it: continuous delivery, small teams. I love the fact that they have like an upper boundary limit on what a small team is. They say don't exceed 9 people. And that is very handy when you're with a client and the client keeps saying, oh, we just need one more person in there and they're going to be the leader. And then we need one more person in there. It's like, let's just try and go by the book and see what that gives us in terms of how would we get all of the skills that we need into just 9 people. So, and that helps with flattening org charts as well, because you don't get this kind of like middle hierarchical leadership layer building up around the teams. It doesn't actually help the teams. So I think it definitely deserves its incredible performance, which is like I think 175,000 copies sold, which is ginormous. And yeah, I found it very accessible and have used it in anger to the point where now we're a team topologies advocate, probably going to be a team topologies valued partner as well. Yeah, would recommend. And I had it recommended to me years ago and I went, yeah. Listened to it, thought, yeah, that's pretty good. But listening to it isn't the same because there's a lot of visual diagrams and information in team topologies, and reading it. And I guess it's reading it and whilst applying it made it quite transformative for me.
I love the book as well. There is, working with a client these days as well, where we do talk about team topologies in different kind of ways and how could we look for more streamlined teams and everything like that. So I think you have a second book as well that you want.
Yes, I do. And I've lost my physical copy of it.
This is
Peopleware.
That's the, well, already a little bit older book. I think it came out before I started working. But I think, well, you talked earlier about the 90s. I think somewhere in the early 90s, I read it, even before I started reading or learning about Agile. Why is this book still relevant these days?
Why is it still relevant? I lost my physical copy. I've given it to someone. It hasn't come back to me, which happens. And I probably just do need to reread it. Back in those days, when kind of Agile was bubbling around for me in the UK and being at Thoughtworks as well, there were kind of like a set bunch of books that it was considered one should read, right? It wasn't mandated, but it was kind of like the white book, the white XP book, XP Explained, I think it's called, the Cauwenberghe. XP, I think there's an XP Project Management that maybe Martin Fowler wrote, which is a green version of the early XP books. The Goal, which I do have a copy of here, was another one. And Peopleware was another one that people said, oh, you really should read Peopleware. So I picked it up because I was like a huge kind of process nerd at that time. And I was, really trying to gobble up everything I could about these ways of working. And, Thoughtworks was a very, but, there were a lot of intellectuals at Thoughtworks. And so you felt imposter syndrome all the time because you're around these people who had written books as well. So there was definitely that kind of feeling of imposter syndrome. So anyway, I faithfully read it and I loved it because I felt like it spoke about the human side of software and how important it was to act and behave as a team. And those kind of things I'd felt even in the previous consultancy that I worked in when I was a software developer. You know, there was this huge part of what we were building was about how we all got along together and how we were friends outside of work, and you know, who were the people on the team that we agreed with the most and we wanted to work with, and could we kind of organize ourselves on the project so that we were kind of working with the people that we liked working with. And so I knew that there was this big kind of human glue part of software, but the book really kind of confirmed it. And I think there's a scene in the book, I could be remembering this wrong, and maybe I'm not thinking about the right book, but where it talks about getting together with your team and cooking a meal together. And weirdly enough, I don't know if it came from the book or if I just observed, hey, aren't we doing this thing that's in the book? We all kind of traveled to where the client was on one particular project at Thoughtworks, and we were all staying in either hotels or apartments or whatever. And someone had like a house that they were renting, and we all went to this house and cooked a meal together, and it was the most disorganized, terrible kind of meal ever. It was like, you know, chuck a whole bunch of software developers together and, you know, teach them how to make pasta while we're making pasta, all a bunch of young people. Drink a lot while you're doing it. That was a big part of the culture back then as well. But yeah, it was just that real thing of like, oh, this is part of this kind of shared experience, is how we kind of interact with each other when we're not on the tools writing software, is an important part of then what we go and build the next day as software. So I think that's why it's on the list. It's kind of like a favorite early read. And you know, I tried to pick books that I feel like kind of changed me at a time when I was seeking something, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think indeed, again, I haven't read it in a while, but I think that the dinner party or the spaghetti dinner or whatever it was, was part of that book as an example of the first thing you should do with a team is cook a meal together, because that way you have already delivered something. And it's something that the team cares about, because they, well, of course they want to eat, so they have to deliver. They can't just spend 2 years creating it, because then they would all have starved by then.
Exactly.
I don't know the details if that's a more agile version that I'm making of these days. But
no, that's a perfect little prompter. And you know what? We ate really late. And I remember being frustrated on that night too, going like, can we not just organize, like, you know, like, there was probably part of me going like, God, if someone just took charge, this meal could get created earlier. But it was pretty messy, as I recall. And yeah, just funny, like an allegory for how the software gets built as well sometimes.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. But then again, you still eat that same evening, so that is good.
Exactly.
I want to move to that next question. For me, one of the most interesting ones, especially after conversations like this, what's a question that you think I should also ask you, and what is the answer?
Oh, what is the answer? Okay. So this is making me pretty curious at the moment, which is, what will software development look like in the future, right? And I'm saying that because of AI. Obviously, I've got to talk about AI. Everything's AI these days, but I'm finding it very fascinating watching AI develop. And I'm not like an AI, know anything to do with what's going on or have the latest tools or whatever. I'm just like observing the way I use it myself, and how it kind of launched, and it was this kind of big, cool thing, and we can be using it for everything. And then we sort of realized, oh my God, is this really flawed actually? And it keeps giving me wrong answers. And I wrote a blog with it, and it's like, I hate that blog now. It seems really dull and lifeless. Like, so we're seeing the flaws in AI, which I think is very interesting. And I'm given to understand this is the same with coding with AI. I read a great article a couple of weeks ago by this guy. I wish I could quote it for you now, about his experience in using AI to help him code, and how he's finding that he's able to spec something really, really well, to the point where you could give it to another developer to build with the help of AI. But also he's asking it to go off and do things for him, and he's finding himself with spare time. like while he's waiting for his AI to come up with an answer for something, he's then playing with things on the side in spare time. And then one of his conclusions was like, yeah, I'm finding it really useful, but man, this is a lonely experience. Like it doesn't feel like it feels when I'm pairing on something with someone. And I just find that so interesting. So where will it go in the future? How much will it simplify the writing of software? Because, I mean, I believe that agile ways of working came about because software is difficult and takes a long time, right? And it's complex. You know, like a lot of times when we try and apply these ways of working to other departments, it happens so easily. Like I've helped some marketing departments, HR departments with their ways of working, things where you don't have to build a software product that's fully tested and working is a lot simpler. Launching an email campaign is very simpler using agile ways of working. So when code becomes less time onerous, what will happen to the software development industry? Like, you know, I feel like there might be a period that we go through where there's a lot of terrible software out in the world because maybe we'll leap too fast and the AI will have helped us, but it will be helping us solve all the wrong problems or something like that. Like, I believe we'll go through a period of terribleness and then maybe it will start to help make our products better, and maybe it'll help make interoperability better. Because, you know, like when the internet came about, we went through a period of like terrible websites. You know, like everyone had a website, but they looked terrible, or usability was awful, and no standards had emerged about how things should work yet. And now we kind of, people know when they're looking at a terrible website now, they're like, oh God, this should behave itself better. How come it's so terrible? To this login experience doesn't feel like any other login experience. So I believe the answer is that that things will get better and maybe we'll get faster. And then my ultimate question is, what will agile software development have to offer us then when things become better and are faster? Will we need all of these ways of breaking down problems and planning as a group? Will that be so required or necessary then? So what will agile become? I think maybe we've lived through a really fascinating time in history, you know, and where will it go?
Yeah, I really like that because indeed, I like the metaphor of the analogy with websites that didn't look really good, even though we knew at the time that they didn't look good. We're still happy that we created a website or that someone else created the website and that we can find some information on it. We didn't care that much, but I can definitely see that in the future we would. We will care much more about these quality codes, and sometimes we developers now might already care about some code, probably just like designers were worried about bad quality websites at that time as well, because I think that at that moment there were already people that knew that the design was bad and might have better ideas, but nobody was listening to them. And so maybe AI will be better, and code will be better at some of these things. So let's hope that things are improving at that time. So looking forward to what that will turn into in the future, just as well as you. I want to move to already that very last question. Who do you think I should ask next?
Yeah, so I believe that my answer was Dan Terhorst North.
Exactly.
Yes, wonderful guy. He was at Thoughtworks in the UK when I was at Thoughtworks in the UK, so I met him very early on in my career. And he's just a delightful individual, like to the point where I'll go on YouTube and look at some of his talks just to witness him giving a talk, because he's just got a very engaging way of talking. So I think he should be on your show, because I think he'd be a very entertaining person to talk to on the show. And also he, you know, I think he actually invented the concept of business-driven development, BDD.
Exactly.
And, you know, that seemed like a really sensible idea in the kind of early 2000s, and still does to me. And, you know, he's not saying anything radically different, than has always been said since those early days. But he's got just a very entertaining way of getting it across. And I think the reason that Matthew Skelton found me was because Dan might have recommended my book, and Matthew got it from me. So strange, kind of like LinkedIn linked experience there. But yeah, he's a great guy. He's also like recommended a couple of clients that are too far away from him because he's in like Northern Europe, in the UK there. So he's given us a couple of Australian clients as well, which has been absolutely lovely. Yeah, but I think as someone who's come from the early days, it's always interesting to talk to those people and see, wow, did it turn out the way you thought it was going to turn out? Because it's not the way I thought it was going to turn out. And yeah, see what they're up to now and what their answers to these great questions might be. Yeah.
And thank you for, well, you're not the first to invite Dan.
Okay, I would have thought so, yeah.
And Doc Norton have invited them. And we still haven't figured out a time to do it, but I'm really looking forward because I like you say, Dan is indeed a lovely person to talk with. Has also crazy ideas, has crazy
ideas. Love it.
Yeah. Well, but crazy and in a positive sense that he might say things that other people don't think it's reality, and then turn it into reality. Like BDD is just it's one of these that it is a lot more that he's. I don't know if he's invented a lot of other things, but I know he was at the start of many different kind of things, inspiring a lot of people, I think.
Yeah, he's one of those inspiring guys. Like, and I think it's definitely what appeals to me is kind of like his silliness and his childlikeness in some ways. Like I know that he's a much more probably serious guy than we both were back in those days when we were in our 20s, but that kind of personality trait is just really delightful to me. And I love working with people who can see the funny side of things, and just have a laugh at themselves and have a laugh at the situation, I think. So, yeah, that's part of why it's so appealing. I mean, I think, Jez Humble's another one who, have you had him on already, Yves?
No, it just is.
I'm sure he's been suggested, though.
He's been suggested already, and it's the same kind of thing. These are the kind of people that, have very difficult agendas, combining it with my agenda that makes it hard.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Both Jeff, yeah.
But I was going to say, Jez is another person that I find incredibly amusing to watch one of his talks. And I think that combination of deep thinker that's a bit silly and a bit funny is just what really appeals to me. Yeah.
Just being the one of the authors of the other book that you talked about.
Yes, Continuous Delivery.
Exactly.
Absolute groundbreaker, and I believe one of the authors of that as well. Exactly. Lean Enterprise. Happen to have all my books stacked up here to show you, but you've got such a lovely collection behind you. I can see Squatification as well, Team Self-Selection by Sandy Mamoli and Dave Mamol.
And Sandy has been here on the show as well, and continues she's a legend somewhere there as well. Indeed, wonderful people to have here. I will add Jez as well as your invitee as well, even if it's just to give him another punch is the wrong
shout out.
Shout out indeed for asking, and seeing if we can synchronize our agendas to see if that's possible. Well, Alexandra, it's been a really wonderful time talking to you.
Same.
If people want to reach out to you, what is the best way for them to reach?
Best way is probably just to find me on LinkedIn, Alexandra Stokes. Just search me, you'll see my.
Should be this one.
Yes, yeah, that's probably the best. You can come and find our website, which is rebootco.com.au if you want to as well, but linking in with me is probably the best place to have a convo with me if you want to.
Okay, well, I want to really thank you for your time. Like I
Thank
said,
you too.
really wonderful. I hope that everybody loved it as much as I did. And well, I wish you now a wonderful rest of the day in the future. At this moment, it's still Monday for me at the moment that we're doing it. But yeah, it's I would guess almost noon for you.
No, it's only
no,
like
it's,
quarter to 10.
o'clock. Yeah, 10
Yeah, yeah,
o'clock,
yeah.
of course. It wasn't 12 hours, it was just 10 hours ahead. So, yeah. Anyway, I wish you a wonderful day, and hopefully we
You too,
can
Yves.
run into each other at some point in a physical conference at some point.
That would be amazing. I'd love that. Thanks a lot, Yves.
Thank you very much.
See ya.
Thank you for watching Who's Agile, where the stories of agilists come to life. I hope you liked today's interview. Subscribe if you're not subscribed and want to get to know other agilists.